So because this is one of the most requested videos, what I want to do here is have a discussion about Superboy Prime. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this, you'll have a strong understanding of his character. But as we get into this, I actually want to sidetrack for a second and have a discussion about Earth Prime in the DC universe. So for those of you who have not seen my video on the history of DC's reboots, which you'll find in the description, we had talked about how the development of DC's multiverse with Flash of Two Worlds led to the creation of a whole host of alternate realities, some of which were one-offs, while others would go on to play major roles in the DC landscape up to the current day. Regarding Earth Prime, this is one of those examples that falls somewhere in between, in that it only appeared a handful of times within DC's publication history prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths. Debuting in Flash Volume 1, issue number 179 in 1968 titled Fact or Fiction, writer Cary Bates provided a scenario where Barry Allen had been attacked by a being named Nock while in the midst of scientific research. Receiving a visit from an alien of unknown origin, Barry Allen was informed that Nock was the manifestation of life itself and had previously been captured but managed to escape when the containment vessel had failed. Furthermore, because the alien ship had been damaged while traveling the spaceways, where the alien begins the process of repairing its vessel, it also informs Barry Allen that if he were unable to subdue Nock, the alien will be forced to depart from Earth, leaving Nock behind. Operating off this information and confronting Nock directly, during the battle, Barry Allen was knocked through the dimensional barrier separating Earth 1 from Earth Prime. Waking up in this new reality, after searching around the landscape and discovering a young boy who knew Barry's name, Barry was also greeted with a Flash magazine depicting his own escapades from his own life. Discovering that Earth Prime was the real world where us as the reader and the various writers live and create their stories, it was also established that Earth Prime did not have any superheroes of its own. Now, because this was only really supposed to be a fun little teaser as opposed to something ongoing, after traveling to the DC head offices, Barry Allen met with editor Julius Schwartz, who created a cosmic treadmill, allowing Barry to break the barriers of space and time, making it possible for him to travel back home to his reality of Earth 1. Now, following this, where Earth Prime wasn't the most popular concept DC had at the time, there was a marginal interest in seeing how a real world would fit into the overall DC multiverse and its possible involvement with superheroes. To this end, DC continued depicting this reality on a handful of occasions, including having Flash writer Cary Bates sent from Earth Prime to Earth 1, as well as introducing Ultra, the first supervillain of Earth Prime, whose original story mirrored Superman's but vacated the Earth Prime continuity after realizing the society was not ready for superheroes, leading him to journey to Earth 1. Following this, where DC began to dissolve its multiverse with Crisis on Infinite Earths, a series of tie-ins were created providing origins for some of DC's most popular characters from alternate realities. Coming out of DC Presents issue number 87 in 1985 as a 6-page backup feature titled The Origin of Superboy Prime, writer Elliot S. Maggin established that much like the Golden and Silver Age versions of Superman from Earth 2 and Earth 1 respectively, Superboy Prime is named Kal-El and hailed from the planet Krypton of the Earth Prime continuity, which faced destruction as the sun went supernova. However, instead of rocketing Superboy to Earth, Kal-El was instead teleported to Earth as an infant, where he was discovered by Jerry and Naomi Kent and named Clark. Now, something that I want to point out here is that because Krypton was incinerated by its sun instead of exploding, Kryptonite actually doesn't exist in the Earth Prime continuity. Now, this is something that I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind, since this will be something Geoff Johns focuses on with Infinite Crisis. But for the first 15 years of his life, Superboy Prime actually had no powers. Instead, he lived a relatively normal life, was engaged in various sports including baseball, track and field, and even had a girlfriend named Lori. However, because Earth Prime exists in a world where DC's heroes were fictional, for Clark, Superman was a comic book character he had basically been growing up with. To this end, as he and his girlfriend prepared for a costume party, Clark had purchased a Superman costume as a reflection of his favorite hero. Now, where a majority of the night passed with Clark and Lori socializing, when Halley's Comet passed the Earth, Superboy Prime's powers were activated, bestowing him with the same powers of Superman in their entirety. Now, tying this into Crisis on Infinite Earths, because this story served as a tie-in to the main event which focused on the Anti-Monitor absorbing the energies of alternate universes to power himself, the Superman of Earth 1 had made his way to Earth Prime, where he met Superboy Prime immediately after his powers had developed. Recruiting him to the cause of the multiverse's different Supermen and superheroes, Superboy Prime went on to fight alongside Superman, Supergirl, Spectre, and a whole host of other heroes from across the multiverse in defeating the Anti-Monitor. Now, where the conclusion of Crisis on Infinite Earths would see the destruction of the multiverse and the formation of a singular continuity titled New Earth, which would go on to become the main DC continuity following Crisis on Infinite Earths, up until the launch of New 52, because it contained the surviving heroes who were given new origins and a reduction in power, where Earth Prime was one of the realities which had been destroyed in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Whether it was to eliminate continuity issues or to store his character for further use, at the conclusion of Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superboy Prime, the heroic Alexander Luthor Jr. of Earth 3, along with the Golden Age Lois Lane and Superman of Earth 2, were sent to a paradise dimension designed to provide a depiction of heaven and a place of eternal splendor, which literally allowed them to alter the dimension around them to suit their needs. Now following this, for the next 20 years, Superboy Prime remained entirely absent from the DC landscape, with neither word nor picture coming out of DC regarding his character. By referencing my video on the history of DC's reboots again, because 2006's Infinite Crisis was designed to be both a 20-year celebration of Crisis on Infinite Earths, but also correct lingering continuity problems, under the writing of Geoff Johns, Superboy Prime was returned to the DC landscape as the story's central villain. Now, the way in which Geoff Johns and Marv Wolfman did this goes directly to how deep their research went into the history of DC Comics as a whole, as well as the power set of Superboy Prime prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths. Covered as a prequel to Infinite Crisis with the one-shot comic Secret Files and Origins by Marv Wolfman, which focused on the lives of Superboy Prime, Alexander Luthor Jr., as well as Superman and Lois Lane of Earth 2 within the Paradise Dimension, where the conclusion of Crisis on Infinite Earths looked to use the Paradise Dimension as a reward for Superboy Prime, giving up everything and everyone he knew or loved for the purpose of saving the multiverse, Marv Wolfman established that instead of Superboy Prime living in eternal splendor, he was essentially a prisoner of his own mind. What I mean here is that where the Paradise Dimension allowed its inhabitants to mold the universe to grant them anything they desired, for Superboy Prime, he was unable to let go of the people he knew and loved, despite the fact that they were completely destroyed with the collapse of the multiverse at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, this particular bit is extremely important and went towards providing a definition of Superboy Prime in the eyes of comic fans. What I mean here is that despite his powers and the nature of his abilities, much like Superman, even if he wasn't a native of Earth, Superboy Prime had grown up to view Earth as his home. As a result, like any human who were to suddenly find themselves stripped away from their home, Superboy Prime was essentially homesick. At the same time, because he and Superman of Earth 2 both resided within the Paradise Dimension and were essentially identical in terms of their origin and heritage, Prime had looked to Superman of Earth 2 as a surrogate father figure. While Superman himself focused largely on Lois Lane and her failing health due to the fact that she was growing older at a faster rate than Superman, the significance of this is that in a lot of ways, Superboy Prime was left to cope with being homesick to the best of his abilities, something he did not have the experience or the maturity to handle. Now, because Superboy Prime was walking a knife's edge between sanity and insanity, Alexander Luthor Jr. began to send Superboy Prime over the edge by having him view the post-crisis continuity of New Earth and the heroes housed within. Where the reason behind Prime, Superman, Lois Lane, and Lex Luthor sacrificing their lives was to ensure a better timeline, after looking into the New Earth continuity, there was very little difference between the heroes and the villains. Now, to sidetrack for a second, with this story serving as a prelude to Infinite Crisis, what Wolfman was doing here was basically providing a meta-commentary and telling us that while this period in DC Comics focused on darker and edgier heroes, the reaction to Superboy Prime is meant to create a dichotomy between what some consider to be the age of heroes and the age of anti-heroes. To this end, in the greater scheme of the Infinite Crisis story, Superboy Prime serves as a metaphor for the idea that the anti-heroes of the post-crisis continuity don't enhance the stories and the characters created within the DC universe, but instead bring them down. This was reflected in the fact that after witnessing the New Earth continuity and comparing it to the way things used to be, Superboy Prime falls prey to his anger and rage, during which time he punches through the very fabric of the Paradise Dimension, freeing Luthor, Superman, Lois, and himself in the process. Now, where Infinite Crisis picked up following this story, for Superboy Prime, he did not immediately become involved with the Earth's heroes. Instead, the early part of the story focused on Superman of Earth 2 and Alexander Luthor Jr. acclimating themselves to the post-crisis continuity by recruiting different heroes and villains to their respective causes. For Superman, his belief was that the key to Lois recovering from her illness resided in the recreation of the Earth 2 continuity, and Alexander Luthor Jr. sought to create the perfect continuity. While the first two issues would go on to see both Superman and Alexander Luthor Jr. set their goals in motion, with issue number 3, Superboy Prime stepped into the fray against the Earth's heroes when Power Girl discovered that Luthor and Superboy Prime had retrieved the remnants of the Anti-Monitor, after which they had captured various heroes including Martian Manhunter and Black Adam, who were used as a kind of tuning fork, allowing Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor Jr. to reform some of the different realities that had been destroyed during Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, something to point out here is that a development that will become essential to the temporary defeat of Superboy Prime at the end of Infinite Crisis is the perspective of Superman from Earth 2. While his universe was destroyed in Crisis on Infinite Earths, During his time speaking with Batman, his view that the post-crisis continuity housed heroes who were more akin to villains was deterred with Dick Grayson. While Grayson's more of a conversation piece than someone who actually meets with Superman alongside Batman, the case that Bruce makes is that not every hero on Earth is an anti-hero. Instead, some individuals like Dick Grayson are good people doing the best they can in tough situations. Now the reason why this matters is that because Superman of Earth 2 is the original Golden Age Superman, this realization began to erode his views, leading to him questioning the motives of Alexander Luthor Jr. and Superboy Prime. Recognizing that this was a strong possibility, Alexander Luthor advised Superman to stay by the side of Lois, effectively keeping him out of the picture while Luthor implemented his plans to restore Earth 2, as well as create a perfect reality. Now for Superboy Prime, because the Death and Return of Superman storyline saw the introduction of Connor Kent as the new Superboy, in a fit of jealousy and anger that his role had been taken over by someone he deemed unworthy, Superboy Prime engaged Connor in a fight that spanned the length of Smallville, almost laying waste to the city, during which time Connor Kent was aided by the arrival of the Doom Patrol, the Justice Society, and the Teen Titans. Now for those of you who are unfamiliar with Superboy Prime, it was basically at this moment that fans latched onto his character and moved forward considering him to be one of DC's best creations, but at the same time, questions reigned as to why he was so powerful in comparison to the different versions of Superman, despite being a younger version of those characters. To answer this question, when Jeff Johns had run through the research of the character of Superboy Prime, along the way, he came to the realization that Prime was modeled after the Superman of the Silver Age. Because this version of Superman was wildly powerful and that he had hundreds of abilities ranging from supermath to the ability to pull planets out of a dying galaxy, while the Silver Age Superman was reduced in power following Crisis on Infinite Earths, since Superboy Prime had been locked away in the Paradise Dimension, he did not receive a reduction in his powers. And so the battle depicts the Doom Patrol, the Justice Society, and the Teen Titans doing what they could. All in all, they were essentially ineffective in that Superboy Prime is a reflection of what it would look like to see someone with the power of Silver Age Superman fighting heroes in the modern day. Now something I'd like you to take note of is that from Superboy Prime's perspective, he's actually doing the right thing and that the various heroes he's fighting are all in the wrong. Now this isn't meant to make Superboy Prime out to be a villain, and it's designed to reflect the idea that butter wouldn't melt in your mouth. What I mean here is that this idiom serves to address the notion of a person who looks innocent but is capable of doing unpleasant things. Similarly, in the context of Superboy Prime prior to breaking out of the Paradise Dimension, he was likely one of DC's greatest forces due to his powers, but also his willingness to sacrifice his normal life for the purpose of ensuring the safety of the multiverse. But removing him from that context and putting him against Earth's heroes, while most have their faults and have made their mistakes, in the end, Superboy Prime has become the very villain he swore to fight against. Now having said that, with the forces of the Justice Society, Teen Titans, and Doom Patrol being completely ineffective, in a last-ditch effort to stop Superboy Prime from killing all of the heroes in a misguided attempt to take over the role of Superman, Bart Allen, Wally West, and Jay Garrick push him into the Speed Force, with Barry Allen and Max Mercury pulling from the other side. While this moment was meant to indicate that Superboy Prime was completely defeated and that beings who were trapped inside the Speed Force were deemed unable to escape due to being stuck within what equated to the afterlife for speedsters, Superboy Prime made his escape in issue number 6. While Jeff Johns doesn't really provide an explanation as to how it was this happened, I want to take a second and actually want to discuss the armor that Superboy Prime was wearing following his reappearance and how it relates to his normal form. Where Superboy Prime simply states that he'd been working on and developed the armor while confined inside the Speed Force, within the overarching DC universe regarding Superboy and the Superman-related characters, one of the reasons they're able to maintain their abilities despite not being in the presence of a yellow sun is that their bodies naturally absorb yellow radiation. The catch here is that they also operate as batteries, meaning that if Superman, Superboy, or any of the other variations were kept away from yellow radiation long enough, they would literally burn through their stores of yellow radiation, causing their powers to weaken and eventually dissipate entirely. Now regarding Superboy Prime's armor, while only moments had passed between the time that he was trapped in the Speed Force and when he escaped, because time is absent in the Speed Force, he began assembling the pieces necessary to build his armor, which operates as a kind of battery pack storing yellow sun radiation, in addition to the radiation absorbed by his body, which enhanced his abilities. As a result, and because he became drunk with power, instead of attempting to return the heroes to the way they used to be prior to the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, instead, Superboy Prime came to the conclusion that he wanted and deserved to be the only hero in existence. Looking to achieve this goal, Superboy Prime aimed to cause another crisis which would destroy the New Earth continuity, allowing him to create reality in his own image. Where Hal Jordan had assembled the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps in an effort to stop this from happening, their efforts were really more of a stopgap, and that because of his natural abilities as a Silver Age version of Superman combined with this new armor, Superboy Prime literally overpowered the entire Corps. Furthermore, with Earth 2 Lois Lane succumbing to her illness and dying, Earth 2 Superman had essentially defected from the side of Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor. Allying himself with the post-crisis heroes, Superman of Earth 2 and Superman of Earth 1 took Superboy Prime through a red sun, stripping him of his armor and reducing his abilities, with the trio eventually landing on Mogo, the living planet, and a member of the Green Lantern Corps. Where Superman of Earth 2 was killed by Superboy Prime in a fit of rage, when the rest of the Lantern Corps arrived, Superboy Prime was taken prisoner, allowing the Green Lantern Corps to keep him on Oa at the center of the universe, within a quantum containment field. Now, following Infinite Crisis and going into the Sinestro Corps War, the countdown to Final Crisis, Legion of Three Worlds, and Blackest Night, in truth, Superboy Prime went through a series of changes under his respective writers, one of the most notable being the name change from Superboy Prime to Superman Prime, and the redesign of his character to reflect the new name. Now, to clarify this, a major source of confusion among DC fans comes with the difference between Superman Prime and Superman 1 Million. While Superman 1 Million is sometimes called Superman Prime, the difference here is that Superman 1 Million came from the DC 1 Million universe, but wasn't seen until the end of that story and possessed powers that made him a virtual god. On the other hand, the name change from Superboy Prime to Superman Prime actually came out of a lawsuit between the Siegel and Schuster estates and DC Comics. What I mean here is that in 1945, when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had created the Superboy concept, because he was a version of Superman, the issue is whether or not Superboy was a separate entity. While DC operated on the claim that Superboy fell under the copyright umbrella of Superman, on March 23, 2006, Judge Ronald S.W. Liu of the District Court of the District of California issued a summary judgment ruling that the Siegels owned the rights to the Superboy character, but DC owned the rights to the name. While the case would be presented before a new court in an effort to clarify the previous ruling, the issue was that while DC could use the Superboy name, they couldn't actually identify any of their characters as Superboy, hence the reason for the name change to Superman Prime. Having said that, with Infinite Crisis seeing the off-panel return of the Anti-Monitor following the reformation of the multiverse, underwriter Jeff Johns as part of his Green Lantern epic, it was revealed that the Anti-Monitor had been acting behind the scenes to both engineer the formation of the Yellow Lantern Sinestro Corps, as well as recruit Superboy Prime, Hank Henshaw as Cyborg Superman, and Kyle Rayner as the host of the Parallax Entity, all of whom were brought on board due to the extreme fear they created during their time as villains in their respective story arcs. Now again, because the Sinestro Corps War focused largely on expanding the Lantern mythos by introducing new Lantern Corps alongside Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns, Superboy Prime was largely a background character, appearing only a handful of times until 9 issues in, when he battled Ion, the manifestation of the Green Lantern's willpower. Where the battle between the two stretched through the entirety of New York City and its surrounding areas, the power of Superboy Prime proved to be superior, and that he successfully defeated Ion, leaving the Green Lanterns without anyone to challenge him. Where Superboy Prime would continue to fight alongside the Sinestro Corps in their battle against the Green Lanterns, in the midst of the conflict, Superboy Prime destroyed the Anti-Monitor, revealing that his whole reason for joining Sinestro's forces was to get close enough to kill Anti-Monitor in revenge for eliminating the Earth Prime continuity during Crisis on Infinite Earths, after which Superboy Prime sought to take the Earth for himself. Engaging in a conflict against the combined efforts of the Sinestro Corps, the Green Lantern Corps, and the whole of Earth's heroes, Superboy Prime laid waste to virtually everyone, leading to one of the Guardians sacrificing their lives by merging with Superboy Prime and sending him away from the New Earth continuity and into the multiverse. Now, referencing my videos on DC's reboots again, because Infinite Crisis served to restore the multiverse, Final Crisis served to make the heroes of Earth aware of the fact that the multiverse had returned. While Superboy Prime did not have a role in the main Final Crisis story itself, in the year leading up to the main story, DC had launched a series of 52 comics in reverse order under the banner of Countdown to Final Crisis, which focused on a series of events ranging from a retelling of the origin of the post-crisis universe to the formation of the 52 Monitors, each guarding and monitoring one universe similar to the Watcher from Marvel Comics. Where the Final Crisis event proper would go on to focus on the death of Darkseid and the collapse of the universe, underwriter Paul Dini, because Final Crisis served as part of DC's lead-up to the Flashpoint storyline, consolidating all of their realities and launching the New 52, Superboy Prime was returned to the DC landscape having aged and wearing the same black uniform worn by Superman following the death of Superman's story arc. Traveling the multiverse in an effort to discover Earth Prime, his journey eventually brought him to the Monitor Station within the multiverse proper, during which time he interrogated and tortured one of the Monitors for information on his home reality. Because the Monitors worked together in ensuring that none of the realities crossed over, Superboy Prime was pointed towards the Earth 51 continuity, which was considered to have been a perfect world. Now, something that I want to point out here is that Earth 51 was not actually Earth Prime. Instead, this was a reality where the Joker had killed Jason Todd, much like the death of the family story arc, but instead of Batman walking away, he killed the Joker, leading to Bruce becoming a vigilante who regularly killed supervillains. To this end, and with most of Earth 51's heroes not knowing about his actions, a large majority of them went unmasked and revealed their identities publicly, ushering in a new era of peace. Where this era was short-lived following the arrival of a villain named Monarch who was from the future of that reality, while both Monarch and Superboy Prime went on to battle one another, Prime proved to be more effective by literally ripping a hole in Monarch, sending his reality warping powers into a fray, and starting a chain reaction, which led to the destruction of the Earth 51 continuity. Now following this, because the legal battles between the Siegel and Schuster estates and DC had reached somewhat of a conclusion, and that DC had been found to own the rights to the Superboy concept, underwriter Jeff Johns and at the direction of Dan DiDio, who serves as the senior vice president of DC, the decision was made to restore Superboy Prime to his familiar appearance and his characteristics as he was most recognizable by fans. To this end, and as a tie-in to Final Crisis, while Jeff Johns had been working with the Legion of Superheroes who functioned as a superhero team from the 30th and 31st centuries, where his project focused on reinventing the pre-crisis version of the team for the modern reader, Superboy Prime was rolled over into the series as a main villain in an effort to both boost the popularity for the Legion of Superheroes, as well as ensure that readers had become aware of Superboy Prime's return to the status quo. Making his return with Legion of Three Worlds issue number 1, the villain Time Trapper, who possessed complete control over time itself, discovered Superboy Prime drifting in space following his battle with Monarch during Countdown to Final Crisis. With Time Trapper functioning as an enemy of the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century, and because this story was meant to be a spiritual sequel to the events in Infinite Crisis, while the discovery of Superboy Prime by Time Trapper resulted in his character being flung into the 31st century, after allying himself with the Legion of Supervillains and waging a war against the Legion of Superheroes, Johns went on to establish that Time Trapper was actually Superboy Prime himself, who survived the end of all things and became the last living being in the DC universe. Now, this particular revelation served two purposes. The first was to give Johns an out regarding a conclusion to the story, but the second was to provide a meta-commentary. What I mean here is that because Superboy Prime hailed from Earth Prime, it stood to reason that when the rest of the DC multiverse ends, because Earth Prime represents the real world, we can make the argument that Superboy Prime represents us as the reader, surviving to the collapse of the overall DC multiverse and the rebirth of a new one. But within the story itself, because a hallmark of Superboy Prime's role in the DC landscape was the extreme power that made it virtually impossible to kill him or keep him prisoner for the long term, Jeff Johns establishing that Time Trapper was Superboy Prime from the end of time itself meant that with Superman from the 21st century working together alongside all versions of the Legion of Superheroes from across the multiverse being unsuccessful in stopping Superboy Prime, the final end to his character came when he was transported to the end of time and forced to confront his older self. Since the personality of Superboy Prime largely remained unchanged in that he continued to believe himself to be the epitome of what it meant to be a hero, the younger and older versions of Superboy Prime engaged in a fight, resulting in the universe resetting itself, the Time Trapper vanishing, and Superboy Prime waking up on Earth Prime after its creation in Infinite Crisis and without any powers. Now, where Superboy Prime would go on to make appearances in DC's Blackest Night and Legion of Doom, the overarching issue with his character was his complex nature combined with the oftentimes confusing element of Earth Prime functioning as the real world within DC's multiverse. Where Jeff Johns and other writers had attempted to rectify this issue by keeping Superboy Prime in conflict with some of DC's best-known teams and heroes, the other half of the problem they faced was that the casual reader's interest in Superboy Prime was largely due to his powers as opposed to his personality. As a result, while hardcore readers enjoy the idea of seeing the evolution of Superboy Prime going from a newly created version of Superman pre-crisis to a teenager with angst in the post-crisis continuity, in the end, unless he was operating as a Black Lantern or else taking on the entirety of DC's hero roster, casual readers had no real interest in seeing his character. This was compounded on by the fact that despite his abilities, Superboy Prime was the Franklin Richards of the DC universe regarding the question, what do you do with a hero who literally can't be killed and has defeated everybody? Answering this question in Teen Titans Volume 3, issue number 100 in 2011 prior to the launch of the New 52, writer J.T. Kroll recycled the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths by having Superboy Prime locked away inside the Source Wall, an inescapable wall separating the DC multiverse from the essence of God. While Superboy Prime's stories have consistently depicted his character escaping from various prisons and continuing to wreak havoc on the world, whether he'll return in New 52 is unknown. But assuming that the source wall contains the same principles as the Paradise Dimension regarding a lack of time, it'd be extremely easy to return him in the same form as he was seen prior to the launch of New 52, and that much like Infinite Crisis, a case could be made arguing that Superboy Prime's imprisonment within the source wall shielded him from the effects of the Flashpoint storyline, keeping him from being rebooted and losing any measure of his powers. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and make sure you guys post a comment down below letting me know what you guys think about Superboy Prime. And I will catch you guys later. Peace.